The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Automate Your Workday with AP Automation, sponsored by AvidXchange. As most of you may know, you're in listen-only mode, and if you have any questions, please feel free to put the questions into the question box. At the end, we will be hosting a poll for additional information, and also we have an exciting giveaway, 2 tickets to the RevX AvidXchange conference in May. And if you go ahead and register in the poll that you're interested to be entered to win, please let us know. So hello everyone, my name is Gabby Hurst. I'm with SWK Technologies and I primarily work with the AvidXchange product. For today's agenda, we're going to talk about time and cost associated with a manual AP process. What does automating your workday look like? And looking inside AvidXchange. So time and cost associated with a manual AP process. To be able to come up with an overall total cost of an invoice, we look at some key factors. In taking the invoice, we know not every vendor sends over the format standardized. It could be either via email or through a paper invoice or even through a packing slip when they do on delivery. Capturing the data can also be difficult in your organization. A lot of companies right now, they either key in the information or they use OCR to receive the information on the invoice. Also, we know matching to invoices and PO can be very lengthy, going through the approval process and then reporting on each invoice. So again, these are the factors of how we came up with this figure. On average, an invoice can cost an organization $11.57. Could you imagine how fast that would accumulate over how many invoices you process each month? Other factors that we didn't even think about as far as time and utilities, again, routing the paper invoices, how are they going to be distributed to each department? How are they going to be distributed to the PO, or excuse me, the purchase order? How, again, making photocopies, using backups for storage, any equipment that is associated for scanning, the approval process. Are you going through email? Are you using a third-party software system? Filing and storage costs. Any information that is not there, how are you handling any discrepancies with a vendor? Also, whenever you create a duplicate payment, voiding out any other missed discounts from your vendor from volume. So we talked about the costs associated with an invoice. So let's talk about these costs associated with a payment. We share the statistic of $11.57. So let's compound that number with $7.78. So we came up with that factor just based on, multiple payments that can be associated with each invoice. A lot of companies, they'll do what's called a check run, or they'll do days where they send out the batches for credit cards and ACH, configuring an ACH payment batch. There's all time associated with that. And so on average, from beginning to end, one invoice can take an organization up to 23 days. So what does automating your workday mean? If you see here, this is probably what your typical day looks like. Again, receiving the email, opening it, routing it through email, getting approvals on POs or matching the PO to it, coding it then into your ERP system, having that approval process, budgeting for your payments that are going to be received, entering that data into your ERP system, posting to your GL, either printing a check and then reconciling that information. In this slide here, you'll see what does life look like with AvidXchange. AvidXchange will take over any of the places that are highlighted in green. So they're going to handle your entering your invoices for you, creating that workflow for approvals, giving you notification once those invoices have been entered into the portal, posting back to your GL, and you still have control during this process. You still can approve the payments, approve the invoices. You get to create your GL codes that are associated with this. And then Avid on the payment side will make the payments on your behalf. So with Avid, you're automating, you're giving visibility to each invoice and payment. You're creating correct data that's going to be entered. You have advanced workflow and approvals. There's no data entry on your behalf, and then the payments are being made on your behalf. Taking advantage of the AvidXchange network, that you can actually your vendors will receive payment either through virtual card, which is easy and secure, direct payment, or checks. Again, that takes away from you having to do a check run and actually, mailing out the checks and the costs associated with that. Not only that, you have the advantage of AvidXchange making the payments on your behalf. You have your supplier network where AvidXchange will negotiate and speak with your vendors on your behalf of what's the preferred method of payment. They'll also give transparency to your vendor of when your payments have been received. And then you will actually be able to see at your fingertips when that information has been approved and if it's been posted. So let's take a look at what AvidXchange can do for your organization. Before I show you the AvidXchange portal, we need to talk about the 3 important ways of how your invoices are received from AvidXchange. You can either mail them in to a secure lockbox, scan them in to a dedicated email exchange, or you can have your vendors email your copy to your dedicated email exchange. So I'm going to jump into the portal. If you can see here, so what will happen is once the invoice has been received and entered in on behalf of your organization by Avid, you'll receive a notification via email. You'll go into your AvidXchange portal and log in. The nice thing about the portal is you can have unlimited users. And also around those users, you can create security parameters. So I've received a notification that I have invoices here for approval. Now this is your main page for invoices. You can see here you have different header information as far as invoice number, date, due date, supplier, the company, and total amount. You can always change these columns on your preference. You can also do a mass approval on your home page, or you can drill down on each individual invoice. Avid's role is responsible for capturing the header information, such as the invoice number, total, the date, the posting amount, the supplier or vendor. Even if you have a PO associated with it, the company that it's going to be posting to. And you can see all that information is captured here. In the right panel is an actual copy of the invoice that was sent in. If you look at the lower tab down here, you have 5 tabs that you can use on each invoice. You can create additional line items here for any of the amounts that may be associated on your invoice. Avid will put the total line item here and the GL code that is dedicated to that total line item. If there was a packing receipt or any other documents that you want to upload or associate to this invoice, you can store it here. Any comments that need to be made, both internally and externally, to your vendor or internal employees. If there's a discrepancy, you can send it to your vendor and tell them where the line item needs to be corrected. There's workflow for approvals. So let's say that you're responsible for approving any invoices $500 and below. And then if somebody else in the organization is responsible for workflow $500 and above, you can create that here. Any historical information associated with that invoice will be stored here from the time that it was received, uploaded, approved, and processed. I do get a lot of questions on this page as far as history and attachments. All your information is stored up to 7 years on the AvidXchange portal. Also, if we go over to the workflow process, let's say that I have somebody dedicated for a different step here in the workflow and they are out of town, you can always create an ad hoc approver here. So we've approved this invoice, and what will happen is you'll create a batch that's going to go over to Sage. Later on in this demonstration, Rebecca's going to show you how we would process that invoice over into Sage and then posting to your GL account. So I'm back on the home page. Another instance that we get, sometimes you have sent over all your invoices and you're in month-end close and you need to create an invoice on the fly. You have that flexibility here. You can also search on all these parameters for any invoices that you have entered into the AvidXchange network. Another great benefit of using AvidXchange is going to be using the paid network. As we had mentioned, AvidXchange will make the payments on your behalf. So what will happen is you'll receive a batch, or actually, excuse me, you'll upload your batch from Sage into the AvidXchange portal. From there, the detailed information will be associated with each payment. You have the option of approving or putting them on hold or voiding the payments associated with each invoice here. Now I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint so I can show you some additional functions that are not available in this portal that you can do on the payment side. And from there, we'll have Rebecca show you what the Sage integration will look like. So when I had highlighted or hover over the batch payment, there's going to be a hyperlink associated with any check that you would have posted to your account for payments. Once that check has been cashed, a copy of that check will be associated with that account record. Just like on the invoice side too, you have approval and workflow process. Here you'll see all the invoices, or excuse me, payments that have been approved or pending approval. Again, you can drill down on each transaction and see the detailed line items. Again, creating the workflow. You also have the functionality if you have posted a payment, you can void the payment up to 24 hours. And you can also do multiple payments. So from here, I'm going to have Rebecca demonstrate our Sage integration. Rebecca, I'm passing over controls to you.
Okay. Can you see my screen, Gabby?
We can. Thank you, Rebecca.
Okay. The Avid interface has a few touch points within Sage. We provide an interface to bring over your AP invoices, and also we bring over invoices into purchase order. The interface, the interface allows you to determine which companies you want to activate for Avid. It allows you to create directories that this information is going to live in during its transfer process. The AvidXchange allows you to upload to Avid any vendor information that you change throughout the process. It's through the Avid Sync process, and it's instantaneous. You go in and change a vendor address and click accept, and it goes up into Avid. When you initially start the process, we can export general ledger codes and budget information so that Avid has information from your system for the setup, and there's no manipulating of Excel spreadsheets during that process. After, as Gabby indicated, in Avid, you would create different invoices. Those invoices would be created depending on whether or not you're interfacing to accounts payable or you're interfacing to a purchase order. If you're interfacing to accounts payable, you would want to distribute the bottom section to the proper GL postings so that when it creates the AP interface, invoice in Sage, all of your information is already generated. If it's a purchase order interface, we have two ways of doing this, and that's with the one-step process within Sage, which is receipt of goods with a receipt of invoice, or the two-step phase where you do the receipt of goods first and then you do the receipt of invoice. With the purchase order process, you do need to have a valid PO number in the Avid system, and if you've already done the receipt of goods, you would put the receipt of goods number in the Avid system so that we could match up to the receipt of goods. The import is done off of a file that you have distributed in your batch, and we're looking to the directory that you've indicated in the setup. We import that information, split it out into the different companies that it's supposed to go to, whether it's going to accounts payable or whether it's going to purchase order based off of the PO number we receive. And at the end of it, if you've done a manual import, we pop up an Excel that indicates the status of all the import information. You can also do this process by doing a window scheduler so that you can automate it throughout the day so it populates your AP invoices or your purchase order invoices throughout the day. Once the items are imported, you can go into your AP and look for the batch information. The comment is the tag that Avid has placed on that batch so that we can follow those items all the way through the system. And it's a standard stock Sage accounts payable data entry at this point. You have invoices that have been distributed to specific GL codes. You can print your journals and you can update. If you're doing purchase order, as a function, you have to decide if you're doing a one-step or two-step. If you do the one-step process, it pulls the information based off of the purchase order. So it's going to match your invoice to whatever your purchase order totals have indicated. And that includes sales tax and freight. If it balances 100%, then it becomes the receipt. We have the invoice number on it, and we pull in all the lines. This particular receipt of goods with invoice shows you that we can pull in all the different lines that Sage has available. This invoice matched the total of the PO. There are specific fields within Sage. There's 5 of them, and they're custom office fields, so you can put them on your screen and make them look real pretty depending on what else you have on your screen. One of them allows you to have the picture of the invoice, the URL pulled down within your invoice, and this can follow through to history so that at any given time, if you want to look it up, you can look it up in the Sage system without having to go to the Avid system. We also bring over the Avid tag that I mentioned earlier so that you can, again, track this information throughout your system. Now, we also have a process that if your invoices do not match, we put them in a hold batch. That's always an H batch. And again, it has a specific tag. This batch is because the invoice that was entered does not match what the purchase order is if we bring it over in its entirety. In my particular instance here, it's because I have lot and serial numbers. The system cannot distribute lot and serial numbers because that's information you need to provide. Once you distribute that information, you can delete our difference line, which we've used for balancing so that we could get the record into Sage. And at that point, then your invoice should match your PO. Once you do that, you can also use the stock Sage functionality and transfer that document to the appropriate batch based off of the tag. Now, the other function that you would have, if you do the receipt of goods ahead of time and you've put the receipt of goods number in the Avid invoice, then you would end up with invoices and receipt of invoice. These invoices work the same, except they're validated off the receipt of goods, not the purchase order. So it takes all the inventory items that you've received on the receipt of goods, and it brings over the freight and or sales tax from the PO. If you have received a partial PO, there could be an out of balance, and it would end up going to a hold batch because the freight might not have been invoiced fully in one invoice. But again, it brings over all the different types of lines and the totals match. And at this point, it's basic Sage. You post and update it through the system. If you're doing landed cost, you can, again, the receipt of goods entry with invoice would work. The interface would also work with scripting. If the scripts were based off of business object functions, then they would trigger as we did our import. Those would have to be reviewed one-on-one as you go through the process. Okay, Gabby.
Thank you, Rebecca. So we talked about what your traditional AP day would look like. We talked about the advantages of using AvidXchange. We looked at the AvidXchange portal. We've looked at the AvidXchange Sage 100 integration. Now let's see if we have any questions. And also, as I had mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, we are giving away 2 free tickets to the user conference in Huntington Beach, California, May 15th and 16th, called RevX. And if you're interested in registering to enter to win, go ahead and put your name in the poll box or the question box, and we'll make sure that you are entered. So if we have any questions, I'd be happy to go over them, or any comments that anybody would like to make. Okay, so we do have one question so far. Oh. Yes, this will be available to download. We'll send out a copy after the webinar has finished and completed. You'll receive a link and any of the PowerPoints that are associated with it. Okay. So I have a question about vendors being entered. If you have, during your initial setup, you will have your vendor list that is imported into the Avid portal. If any other additional vendors are added, there's a tool called Vendor Sync, or you can manually enter them in. Another great question about coding. AvidXchange does not do the coding process. However, there is a tool called Smart Coding. So anything that has been already entered in, it will associate with that description and that GL code to speed up the process. Okay, I have another question about the virtual card. So the virtual card is issued by MasterCard. It is a secured one-time preloaded card that is sent over to your vendor. And let's see. Looks like that's all the questions that we have. Again, please enter your questions into the window. And if you're interested in winning the 2 free tickets to the user conference, please enter your information into the poll box or the question box. Okay, well, if you would like more information, please feel free to email me, your account manager. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.